The quantum wake was the first anomaly. It registered on the Sol relay station's deep space sensors as a localized distortion in the fabric of spacetime, a bruise in the vacuum roughly 3 astronomical units from Earth. The sensor officer, a young cadet named Voss, nearly dismissed it as a gravitational echo from a passing comet, but the waveform was wrong. Comets didn't leave sharp geometric signatures, only engines did. Voss flagged the reading and routed it to the station's tactical AI. The AI processed the data for a fraction of a second and escalated it to priority 1, triggering a silent alarm across the entire Sol defense network. The waveform was an exact match for a Class IV human slip drive, a propulsion system that hadn't been manufactured in over 18,000 years. Admiral Jace Morrow was pulled from a deep sleep by the shrill of his personal comm. He was a tall man, lean and angular, with the silver-streaked hair and weathered face common to humans who had spent too many decades under artificial suns. He strapped on his uniform with the practiced efficiency of a man who had been woken by emergencies more times than he cared to remember. "Report," he said, stepping onto the station's central command bridge. "Admiral, we have a re-entry event at the edge of the system," the Night Watch commander said, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "Single vessel. Mass signature indicates a capital ship. Drive signature is archaic, pre-Unity era." Morrow felt a cold finger trace down his spine. The pre-Unity era was the dark ages of human history, the millennia before the colonies had united under a single government. It was the era of the diaspora, when humanity had first reached for the stars and immediately started fighting over them. The ships from that time were legends, ghost stories told to academy cadets to teach them about the consequences of reckless ambition. "Visual range?" Morrow asked, taking the central command seat. "Negative, the vessel is still decelerating from slip space. Estimated time to sublight velocity, 4 minutes." Morrow stared at the main viewport, which showed the familiar, glittering sprawl of the Sol system. Earth was there, a blue-green jewel framed by the orbital rings of the megacities. It was the crown jewel of human civilization, home to 30 billion people and the seat of the unified Earth government. It had been peaceful for 10,000 years. Wars were things that happened on the frontier, far from the core worlds. The Sol Defense Network was a formality, a relic of a more violent age that existed mostly to make the politicians feel safe. "Hail them," Morrow ordered, "all frequencies, all protocols." The comm officer opened a channel. Silence. The vessel wasn't responding. "2 minutes to sublight," the watch commander announced. Morrow's fingers drummed on the armrest. A ghost ship from the pre-Unity era appearing out of nowhere in the heart of human space. It didn't make sense. The slip drives of that era were notoriously unstable. Ships that jumped into the deep black rarely came back. Those that did were usually empty husks, their crews dead from drive failure or starvation. A capital ship making a controlled re-entry after 20,000 years was statistically impossible. "1 minute." The main viewport flickered as the station's long-range optics automatically focused on the re-entry point. The stars at the edge of the system seemed to stretch, then snap back, and a shape emerged from the distortion. It was a ship, but it was not like anything in the modern fleet. It was massive, 4 kilometers of overlapping armor plate bristling with weapon turrets that looked less like precision instruments and more like industrial machinery bolted to a hull. There were no sleek lines, no elegant curves. It was a fortress, a floating cathedral of steel and resolve. It bore scars, deep gouges in its armor, massive craters where something had punched through, entire sections missing to reveal the skeletal framework beneath. It looked like it had been through hell and back. And it was flying straight toward Earth. "God above," someone whispered on the bridge. "Identification," Morrow demanded, his voice cutting through the awe. The AI cross-referenced the ship's profile against the historical database. It took less than a second. The result flashed on the main screen in cold white text. "Vessel identification, UHS Terminus, flagship of the 1st Expeditionary Fleet. Launched 20,142 years ago. Status: missing, presumed destroyed. The Terminus, Morrow breathed. Every human child knew the name. The Terminus was the first human flagship, the vessel that had led the initial push into deep space. It had been launched with great fanfare, carrying 10,000 colonists and soldiers into the unknown, and then it had vanished. No distress call, no debris, no trace. It had simply ceased to exist, becoming one of the greatest mysteries in human history. And now it was homed. Admiral, the vessel is not responding to hails, the comm officer reported. It is maintaining a direct course for Earth. Estimated arrival in orbit 47 minutes. Launch interceptors, Morrow ordered. I want a fighter screen between that ship and Earth. Nobody gets close to the homeworld without identifying themselves. And get me a direct line to the Prime Minister. The interceptors launched from the station's bays like a swarm of glittering insects, their modern fusion engines leaving clean blue trails as they formed a defensive wedge between the Terminus and Earth. Morrow watched the ancient flagship on the viewport, a lumbering giant surrounded by a cloud of sleek, modern gnats. The contrast was staggering. The interceptors could probably have torn the Terminus apart with a single volley, their weapons technology having advanced exponentially since the old ship was built. But Morrow wasn't interested in fighting. He wanted answers. Admiral Morrow, the voice of Prime Minister Lyra Chen came through the calm but strained. I've been briefed. What is the situation? Prime Minister, the Terminus has returned to Sol. It is not responding to communication and is on a direct course for Earth. I have interceptors in position to. Do not fire, Chen interrupted, her voice sharp. That ship is a national treasure. It carries the remains of our ancestors. If there is any chance of establishing communication, we take it. Is that clear? Crystal, Prime Minister, but if it doesn't stop. If it will stop, it's human, have faith, Admiral. The line went dead. Morrow gritted his teeth. Faith was not a tactical asset. As the asterisk Terminus closed the distance, the interceptors reported more details. The ship was running on minimal power. Only its forward sensors and propulsion were active. The weapon turrets were cold. The hull was riddled with micrometeorite impacts and what appeared to be weapons scars from an unknown origin, and there were no life signs, not one, 10,000 people, and not a single heartbeat. It's a ghost ship, the watch commander murmured. 30 minutes to orbit, the navigation officer announced. Morrow made a decision. I'm taking a shuttle. Admiral, the watch commander started. That's an order, Commander. You have the con. Morrow was already heading for the bridge exit. He didn't know what he would find on the Terminus, but he knew that sitting on the station watching it approach wasn't going to give him any answers. He needed to be on that ship. He needed to see it with his own eyes. The shuttle launched from the station's underbelly and raced toward the approaching flagship. As it drew close, the sheer scale of the Terminus became overwhelming. It filled the viewport like a moving mountain, its scarred hull passing by at a deceptively slow pace. Morrow could see the individual armor plates, each one the size of a city block, welded together by hands that had been dead for 20 millennia. He could see the gun turrets, their massive barrels still aimed forward, as if the ship was still fighting a battle that had ended long ago. He found the main hangar bay. The doors were open, a massive maw in the ship's flank. He guided the shuttle inside, the docking clamps engaging with a reassuring clang. The hangar was dark. Morrow activated his suit lamp, the beam cutting through the blackness. The bay was empty of ships, but it was not empty of history. The walls were covered in murals, hand-painted murals, the kind that no one had made in thousands of years. They depicted the launch of the Terminus asterisk, the cheering crowds, the blue sky of Earth. They depicted the crew, men and women in simple uniforms, their faces frozen in expressions of hope and determination. Morrow floated out of the shuttle, his magnetic boots engaging on the deck. He walked toward the inner bulkhead, passing under the painted gaze of people who had been dead since before human civilization had learned to write. He reached a vertical shaft, a lift shaft, the lift long since broken. He climbed the ladder rung by rung, his arms burning with the effort. He climbed for 20 minutes, passing deck after deck, each one dark and silent and dead. He reached the bridge. The door was open, he stepped inside. The bridge was enormous, designed to command a fleet. The ceiling was low, reinforced with thick armor beams. The consoles were analog, physical switches and dials and screens made of glass. In the center of the room, mounted on a heavy pedestal, was a ship's log, not a digital file. A physical book bound in leather, its pages yellowed with age. And sitting in the command chair, slumped forward, his head resting on the console in front of him, was a man. Morrow froze. The man was wearing a uniform dark blue with gold trim on the cuffs. Rank insignia on the shoulders, Admiral. His skin was mummified, stretched tight over his skull. His hair was white, long and brittle. His hands rested on the console, one of them resting on a large red button. He was dead. He had been dead for 20,000 years. But he was sitting in the command chair, his hand on a button, as if he had simply fallen asleep at his post. Morrow approached slowly, his lamp playing over the desiccated figure. He reached out and gently lifted the Admiral's hand off the button. Underneath was a small hand-lettered sign that read, "Press to speak." Morrow pressed it. A crackling sound filled the bridge, then a voice. A human voice, rough with static and age, but unmistakably human. "This is Admiral Marcus Cole, commanding the first Expeditionary Fleet aboard the UHS Terminus. If you are hearing this, then the ship has made it back to Sol. I am sorry I couldn't be there to greet you in person. I ran out of time." Morrow's hand trembled on the button. He pressed it again. "I don't know how much you know about what happened to us. I don't know how much time has passed, but I need you to understand why we are here and why the ship is flying itself. So I'm going to tell you everything." Morrow looked around the bridge. He found a chair, a simple metal folding chair that had been bolted to the floor, clearly placed there for whoever found this message. He sat down, leaned forward, and pressed the button again. "We launched from Earth 20,000 years ago. Our mission was to explore the Sagittarius Arm, find habitable worlds, and establish the first colonies beyond the Sol system. We were the best and brightest humanity had to offer. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, families. We carried the hopes of a world on our backs, and for the first 5 years, everything was perfect. We found worlds, we planted flags, we built outposts, we were making history." A pause, static, then we found the construct. It was an artificial structure buried in the crust of a moon orbiting a gas giant. It was old, older than humanity, older than the solar system. Our scientists went inside, they found a chamber, and in the chamber was a device. A sphere made of a material we couldn't identify. It was beautiful, it hummed with power, and when our lead scientist, Dr. Eris Thorne, touched it, it woke up. Morrow leaned closer to the console. The name Thorne caught his attention. It was a common name, but something about the way Cole said it made the hair on Morrow's neck stand up. The sphere was a beacon. The moment Thorne touched it, it sent a signal. A signal that traveled faster than light, faster than slip space, reaching across the entire galaxy. And something answered. The static, a long hissing pause. If you're enjoying this journey into the deep unknown so far, take a quick second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below with your theory on what answered that beacon. Your support keeps these stories coming, and you won't want to miss what happens next. They came from outside the galaxy. We never learned their real name. We called them the Harvesters. They were not alive, not in any way we understood. They were machines, vast, intelligent, remorseless machines. And their purpose was simple: they harvested. They consumed planets, stripped them of resources, and used the materials to build more of themselves. The sphere was their lure. They planted it there thousands of years ago and waited for someone stupid enough to touch it. Another pause. Cole's voice was changing, growing heavier, as if the weight of the memory was physically pressing down on him. "Our fleet was the first thing they found. We never had a chance. Their ships were beyond anything we had ever seen. They didn't use energy weapons or kinetic slugs, they used gravity. They crushed our ships like tin cans. The first fleet was destroyed in less than an hour. 10,000 people gone in the blink of an eye. Morrow felt a chill. The Harvesters. The name wasn't in any database he had ever accessed. A machine intelligence from outside the galaxy consuming worlds. It sounded like a myth, a bedtime story to scare children. But the dead man in the chair wasn't telling bedtime stories. I survived because the Terminus was the flagship. She was the toughest ship we had. The crew sacrificed themselves to get me to the bridge and I jumped us into slip space. A blind jump, no destination, no coordinates, just away. The Terminus was dying. The hull was breached in a dozen places. The slip drive was overheating. We were leaking atmosphere and fuel. I put the crew into cryosleep, all of them hoping that someone somewhere would find us. But the drive failed before we could reach a safe system. We were stranded in interstellar space, between stars in the middle of nowhere. Static crackled, the recording skipped, and Cole's voice returned, noticeably older, more tired. That was 15,000 years ago. I woke F. Rom cryo to find that the stasis pods had failed, all of them. One by one, over the millennia, the pods failed and the people inside died. I was the last. The ship's AI had kept me alive the longest, cycling me in and out of stasis to perform repairs, but even it was failing. The power was dying, the heat was dying, I was dying. Morrow looked at the mummified figure. Cole had sat in this chair alone in the dark, watching his crew die around him, one by one, for 15,000 years. The sheer psychological horror of it was almost incomprehensible. I knew I wasn't going to make it back to Sol alive, so I made a decision. I rerouted every remaining ounce of power to the navigation computer and the slip drive. I calculated a course back to Earth, a single, final jump. I set the ship to auto-navigate, locked the course into the drive, and sat down. I pressed the button that would initiate the jump the moment the drive had charged enough energy. And then I died. A long pause. The static seemed to soften, as if the recording itself was exhausted. But the ship made it. The Terminus made it home. And if you're hearing this, that means Earth is still there. That means humanity survived. That means everything we did, everything we sacrificed wasn't for nothing. Morrow's throat was tight. He pressed the button, but there was nothing left. The recording had ended. He sat in the dark, on a folding chair, on a bridge that hadn't seen a living soul in 20,000 years. He sat with a dead admiral who had spent 15 millennia alone in the dark so that his ship could find its way home. And he thought about what Cole had said. If you're hearing this, that means Earth is still there. Morrow stood up. He walked to the bridge viewport and wiped away the grime of 20 millennia with the sleeve of his uniform. He looked out at the Sol system. Earth was not there. Where the blue-green jewel should have been, there was nothing, an empty orbit. No planet, no orbital rings, no megacities, no 30 billion people. Just a clean, smooth ellipse of absolutely nothing at all. Morrow stared. His mind refused to process what his eyes were telling him. Earth was gone, not destroyed, not broken, not hidden behind some sensor anomaly. Gone, as if it had never existed. The third orbit around the sun was vacant, a hole in the sky where a world should be. He turned back to the dead admiral. Cole had died believing Earth was still there. He had spent 15,000 years in the dark, alone, keeping himself alive through sheer willpower just to send his ship home. And home wasn't there. Morrow activated his comm, Morrow to Sol's station. Admiral, thank God we've been trying to reach you, sir. There's been a development. I know, Morrow said, his voice hollow. Earth is gone. No, sir, Earth is not gone. Earth has been moved. Morrow gripped the console. Moved. A planet doesn't just get moved. Sir, we've analyzed the orbital data. Approximately 300 years ago, Earth disappeared from its orbit, but it didn't cease to exist. We found a gravity shadow. Earth was moved to a new location by an unknown force. We've traced the gravity shadow to a point in the Oort cloud, sir. Earth is out there. hidden. Morrow's mind raced. Someone had moved an entire planet. The engineering required was beyond anything humanity had ever achieved. It was beyond anything any known civilization had ever achieved. Who could move a planet, and why? "I'm coming back," Morrow said. "Have the Prime Minister assemble the full Security Council and get me everything we have on gravitational displacement technology, everything." He cut the comm and looked at Admiral Cole. He reached out and closed the dead man's eyes, a gesture that felt absurd and profoundly necessary at the same time. "You made it home, Admiral," Morrow whispered. "Home just moved." He turned and left the bridge. He climbed down the ladder, rung by rung, his mind a whirlwind of questions and fears. He reached the hangar, boarded his shuttle, and launched back towards Sol Station. Behind him, the terminus continued its slow, silent approach, following the course that a dead man had calculated 15,000 years ago. It was still flying home, still trying to complete its mission, even though the home it remembered didn't exist anymore. The Security Council was in an uproar. Prime Minister Chen, a woman who had built her career on composure and control, was pacing behind her chair like a caged animal. The 12 members of the council, representatives from the core worlds, the colony regions, and the military, were shouting over each other, a cacophony of fear and confusion. "Silence," Chen snapped, and the room fell quiet. "Admiral Morrow, report." Morrow stood at the head of the table, a holographic projection of the Sol system floating above it. The third orbit was empty. A small, glowing point in the Oort cloud marked ear. "TH's current position." "The Terminus is the flagship of the first Expeditionary Fleet, launched 20,000 years ago," Morrow began. "It carries the remains of Admiral Marcus Cole, who died on the bridge after setting the ship on an automated return course. His final message contains a warning about an extragalactic threat he called the Harvesters, a machine intelligence that consumes planets." "Extragalactic," Counselor Voss, a heavy-set man from the outer colonies, scoffed. "Admiral, that sounds like a fairy tale." "The Terminus is not a fairy tale, Counselor," Morrow said flatly. "It's sitting in orbit right now with weapons scars that match no known civilization, and its commander spent 15,000 years alone in the dark to bring that warning home. I suggest we listen." "Where is Earth?" Counselor Park asked, a thin, nervous woman from the academic bloc. "Who moved it, and why?" "That is the question of the century, isn't it?" Morrow said. "Our best engineers say that moving a planet would require the ability to manipulate gravity on a stellar scale. We can't do it. The Vreshter can't do it. No one in the galaxy can do it. But someone did it 300 years ago, and they did it without anyone noticing." "300 years ago," Chen said, stopping her pacing. "That was during the silence." The room went very still. The silence was a period in human history, roughly 3 centuries ago, when all of Earth's communication networks had gone dark for exactly 7 days. No one had ever been able to explain it. When the networks came back online, everything was normal. No damage, no casualties, no evidence of tampering. It had been written off as a massive, simultaneous system failure, a 1 in a billion coincidence. But now, looking at the empty orbit and the hidden planet, Morrow wasn't so sure. "Pull the records from the silence," Chen ordered. "Every byte of data from every sensor, every satellite, every log. I want to know what happened during those 7 days." "That will take time, Prime Minister," a tech officer said from the side of the room. "The data is archived on legacy systems. It could take weeks to." "Then start now," Chen said. "Admiral Morrow, I want you to take a fleet to the Oort cloud, find Earth, find out who moved it and why, take the Terminus with you." Morrow blinked. "The Terminus * Prime Minister, it's a derelict. It has no crew, no weapons, no." "It has history," Chen said, her eyes boring into his. "It has meaning. And if what Admiral Cole said is true, if there really is something out there that consumes planets, then I want the ship that survived them leading the way. Symbolism matters, Admiral, now go." Morrow saluted and left the chamber. He assembled a task force, 12 modern cruisers, a carrier group, and the Terminus Asterisk, which was towed behind the flagship like a reluctant child. The journey to the Oort cloud took 6 hours at maximum slip speed. They arrived to find a wall of fog. It wasn't real fog, of course. There was no atmosphere in the Oort cloud, but the sensors registered a massive spherical cloud of particulate matter, microscopic dust, and ice crystals that completely enveloped the area where Earth's gravity shadow was located. It was artificial. Someone had hidden the planet inside a cloud of cosmic dust. Admiral, the dust cloud is emitting a low-frequency gravitational pulse, the sensor officer reported. It's acting as a cloak, bending light and sensor readings around the interior. We can't see inside. Can we penetrate it? With weapons, yes, but if Earth is in there, we don't want to start shooting. Morrow stared at the cloud. It was massive, hundreds of millions of kilometers across. Hiding a planet inside it was an act of engineering genius or madness or both. Take us in, Morrow ordered, slow and steady, all ships on high alert. The fleet entered the cloud. Visibility dropped to 0. The ships relied entirely on their sensors, navigating by feel through the thick, artificial fog. The gravitational pulses were disorienting, playing havoc with the inertial navigation systems. Ships reported feeling as if they were flying sideways or upside down or standing still. And then, abruptly, they were through. The cloud parted like a curtain and Earth appeared. It was beautiful, pristine, unchanged, the blue oceans, the green continents, the white swirl of clouds. It looked exactly as it had in every photograph Morrow had ever seen. It looked like home. But there was something else. Orbiting Earth, a ring of structures that Morrow had never seen in any database. They were massive, beautiful, and clearly not human. They were made of a translucent, crystalline material that refracted the sunlight into 1,000 rainbow colors. They were arranged in a complex geometric pattern around the planet, connected by beams of pure light. And sitting in the center of the ring, directly above the north pole, was a ship. It was not a warship, it was not a cargo vessel, it was something else entirely. It was a sphere, perfectly smooth, perfectly white, roughly the size of a small moon. It emitted no heat, no radiation, no electromagnetic signature of any kind. It was simply there, hovering in orbit like a silent, watchful eye. Admiral, the sensor officer's voice was barely a whisper. The sphere, it's generating the dust cloud and the gravitational displacement that moved Earth, and the silence, the energy signature matches exactly. Someone has been hiding Earth, Morrow said, his mind reeling, for 300 years without us knowing. Admiral, we're being hailed, the comm officer said. From the sphere, it's on a human frequency, but the signal is quantum entangled, it's instantaneous. I'll put it through. The main screen flickered, a face appeared. It was human, a woman middle-aged with dark skin and gray-streaked hair. She was wearing a uniform dark blue with gold trim on the cuffs. Rank insignia on the shoulders, Admiral. Morrow's blood turned to ice. Admiral Jace Morrow, the woman said, her voice calm and clear with an accent that belonged to no known human colony. My name is Admiral Serena Cole. I am the commanding officer of the Terran Shield Directive. Welcome to Earth. We've been expecting you. Morrow stared at the screen. Cole, the same last name as the dead man on the Terminus. Admiral Cole, Morrow said carefully, you have some explaining to do. Yes, Serena Cole agreed. I suppose I do, but first I need you to understand something. The man you found on the Terminus Admiral Marcus Cole, is my father, and he didn't die on that bridge, not exactly. The screen shifted, showing a montage of images. The Terminus drifting in interstellar space, the stasis pods failing one by one, and then a different image, a beam of light descending from the void enveloping the dying ship. When my father's ship was stranded, the directive found him, Serena said. We pulled the Terminus out of the void and brought it to a facility outside the galaxy. My father was dying. The stasis had degraded his body beyond repair. So we did the only thing we could. We uploaded his consciousness into the directive's network. He lives, Admiral, not in a body but in the light, and he has been watching over Earth for 20,000 years. Morrow felt the deck shift beneath his feet. An uploaded human consciousness watching over a hidden planet for 20 millennia. It was insane, it was impossible, and yet the woman on the screen had his father's eyes. The directive, Morrow said, who are you? We are the descendants of the first Expeditionary Fleet, Serena said. Not the ones who died on the Terminus, the ones who escaped. When the harvesters attacked, a handful of ships managed to slip away. They found refuge with an ancient civilization, the architects, who had been fighting the harvesters for millions of years. The architects gave us technology, training, and a purpose. They taught us how to move planets, how to hide stars, how to fight a war that spans galaxies. And they gave us one job: protect Earths. Protect it from what? Morrow asked, though he already knew the answer. From the harvesters, Serena said, her face hardening. They are coming, Admiral. The beacon that my father's fleet accidentally triggered has been sending a signal for 20,000 years. The harvesters have been following it, and they are almost here. Morrow looked at the screen, at the woman who called herself the daughter of a dead man, at the alien structures orbiting a hidden planet, at the white sphere that had been keeping humanity safe without its knowledge. He thought about the Terminus, drifting through the void for 20 millennia, carrying a warning that no one had heard. He thought about Marcus Cole, sitting in the dark, alone, pressing a button that would send his ship home. And he thought about Earth. Beautiful, fragile Earth, hidden away like a child in a bunker while the war raged outside. How long? Morrow asked. Days, Serena said, maybe hours. The harvesters travel between galaxies using gravity manipulation. They compress spacetime itself, folding the distance between here and the nearest galaxy into a single step. When they arrive, they won't negotiate. They won't communicate. They will simply begin to consume. What do you need? Morrow asked. Serena Cole smiled. It was a sad, tired smile, the smile of someone who had been fighting a war for 20,000 years and was finally almost reaching the end. I need you to remember who you are, Admiral, she said. I need you to remember that humans don't run, we don't hide, not forever. My father knew that. He sat in a dead ship in the dark for 15,000 years because he knew that someone needed to carry the warning home. He didn't do it for himself, he did it for you. For everyone on those ships behind you, for the 30 billion people on that planet. She paused and her smile faded, replaced by something harder, something fiercer. We've been protecting Earth for 20,000 years, Admiral. We've moved it, hidden it, shielded it, and fought in the dark so that humanity could grow and thrive and forget. Forget the war, forget the fear, forget the monsters in the void. But the monsters are at the door. And it's time for humanity to remember. The screen went dark. Morrow stood on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by the silent, watchful presence of his fleet. Behind him, the Terminus floated in orbit, a ghost from another age, its scarred hull catching the light of the hidden sun. He opened a fleet-wide channel. Every ship, every crew member, every man and woman in the task force heard his voice. This is Admiral Morrow. All ships' battle stations, I know you have questions, I know you're scared. So am I, but right now there is a fleet of machines from outside this galaxy heading toward Earth and they want to eat our home. We can run, we can hide, or we can stand and fight. He paused, looking at the image of the Terminus on his screen. 20,000 years ago, a man named Marcus Cole sat in a dead ship and pressed a button because he believed that someone would be here to listen. He believed in us. Let's not let him down. He closed the channel and sat down in the command chair. Admiral, the weapons officer said, his voice shaking. I'm reading a massive gravitational distortion at the edge of the Oort cloud. Something is folding into the system. Morrow looked at the viewport. The stars were bending. The fabric of space was warping, twisting, folding in on itself like a piece of paper being crumpled by an invisible hand. And in the center of the distortion, a shape was emerging. It was vast, a machine, a living cathedral of dark metal and glowing circuitry easily the size of a moon, and behind it another, and another, dozens of them, hundreds, pouring through the fold in space-time like a swarm of locusts. The harvesters had arrived. Morrow leaned back in his chair and watched them come. He wasn't afraid, he was angry. For 20,000 years, humanity had been a child, coddled and protected, kept in the dark while others fought its battles. But children grow up. And sometimes growing up means learning to fight your own battles. All ships, Morrow said, his voice as cold and hard as the void itself. Open fire. The fleet erupted. Beams of plasma and kinetic slugs lanced out toward the incoming swarm. The Terminus, running on whatever residual power still lingered in its ancient bones, joined in. Its massive turrets, silent for 20 millennia, roared to life, throwing solid metal at the enemy with a primitive, brutal fury that made the modern weapons look like toys. The battle for Earth had begun. And in the hidden heart of the Oort cloud, under the watchful eye of a white sphere and the ghost of a man who had refused to die, humanity remembered. They remembered how to fight, they remembered how to bleed, they remembered how to sacrifice. And most of all, they remembered who they were. They were the children of Earth, and they did not go quietly into the dark. The harvesters were machines, logical and efficient. They had consumed thousands of worlds, crushed thousands of civilizations. They had never encountered a species that had been raised in the light, protected in the dark, and then unleashed with 20,000 years of pent-up fury. The first wave of harvester vessels crumbled under the combined fire of the modern fleet and the ancient Terminus. The kinetic slugs from the old ship's turrets punched through harvester hull armor like it was tinfoil, transferring so much kinetic energy that the machines simply disintegrated. The modern plasma beams carved through the survivors, slicing them into pieces that tumbled, lifeless, into the void. But there were always more. The fold in spacetime kept spitting them out, an endless river of dark metal and glowing circuits. The fleet was taking hits. 3 cruisers went down in the first 10 minutes, their hulls crushed by harvester gravity weapons. A carrier was split in half by a beam of concentrated dark matter. Morrow watched the casualties mount on his tactical display, his face unreadable. This was war. Real war, not the simulated exercises and border skirmishes that the modern Navy was used to. People were dying, ships were exploding, and the enemy kept coming. "Admiral, the Terminus is taking heavy damage," the weapons officer shouted. "Its hull is at 40% integrity. The ancient systems can't take much more." The Terminus was in the thick of the fighting, its massive bulk drawing fire from the more fragile modern ships. It was doing what it had been built to do, absorb punishment and keep fighting. But 20,000 years of decay had weakened it, it was dying again. "Hold the line," Morrow ordered. "All ships concentrate fire on the lead harvester, take it down." The fleet complied, focusing their fire on the massive lead vessel. It was a monolith, easily 10 times the size of the Terminus, its surface bristling with gravity projectors and dark matter cannons. It absorbed the fire of the entire fleet without flinching, returning fire with devastating precision. Then the Terminus did something unexpected. It turned. Abandoning its position in the line, the ancient flagship accelerated directly toward the lead harvester, its turrets firing non-stop. It was a ramming maneuver, a suicide run. "No," Morrow shouted, "Terminus, break off, that's an order." The Terminus didn't respond. It was running on its original programming, the last command that Marcus Cole had given it 20,000 years ago, protect Earth. And right now, the biggest threat to Earth was the lead harvester. The ancient ship plunged into the harvester's flank like a dagger into a heart. The impact was catastrophic. The Terminus *S bow crumpled, its armor shattering, its interior erupting in a cascade of fire and metal. But it had penetrated the Harvester's hull, burying itself deep inside the machine's interior. And then, the Terminus *S reactor went critical. The explosion was blinding. The lead harvester, a machine the size of a moon, cracked apart like an eggshell, its interior consumed by the controlled fury of a 20,000-year-old fusion reactor. The shockwave rippled outward, slamming into the surrounding harvester vessels and sending them tumbling. The fleet cheered, but Morrow didn't cheer. He watched the debris field where the Terminus had been, his jaw clenched. The old ship was gone again. But this time it had chosen to go. Admiral, the sensor officer, yelled, "New contact, the white sphere, it's moving." Morrow looked up. The white sphere, which had been hovering motionless above Earth's North Pole, was rising. It was moving toward the battle, accelerating with a smooth, silent power that defied physics. As it moved, it began to change. Its surface rippled, then unfolded like a flower blooming in fast forward, arms, legs, a head. The sphere was transforming into something humanoid, something colossal, something alive. It was an architect. The being that unfolded from the sphere was a giant, easily 1,000 kilometers tall. Its body was made of the same translucent crystalline material as the orbital structures, refracting light into a dazzling display of color. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless plane where a face should have been, but Morrow could feel its attention, its focus, like the weight of a star pressing down on him. The architect raised one hand, and the fold in space-time closed. It wasn't a gradual process. The architect simply reached out and pinched the fold shut as if it were closing a curtain. The river of harvester vessels was cut off midstream. The machines already in the system were isolated, trapped, alone. The architect lowered its hand and looked at the remaining harvesters. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the harvesters began to retreat. They turned one by one and fled toward the edge of the system, trying to find another way out, another fold point, another escape route. The architect didn't let them. It moved, its colossal form crossing the distance between Earth and the fleeing machines in a single step, and it brought its hands together. The resulting shockwave flattened the remaining harvesters like insects under a boot. One moment they were fleeing. The next they were debris. It was over. Morrow sat in his chair, staring at the colossal figure now standing motionless in the middle of the system. Around it, the debris of the harvester fleet glittered like a field of broken stars. The battle was over. Earth was safe. "Admiral," the comm officer said, his voice hushed. "We're being hailed again from the architect." "I'll put it through." The main screen flickered, but this time it was Serena Cole's face that appeared. It was a man, dark skin, gray-streaked hair, dark blue uniform with gold trim on the cuffs. "Marcus Cole." But not the mummified corpse Morrow had found on the bridge. This was Cole as he had been, alive, whole, his eyes bright with an intelligence that transcended human understanding. He was projected from the architect's network, his consciousness riding the light of the crystalline giant. "Admiral Morrow," Cole said, his voice warm and resonant, no longer distorted by static or age. "I owe you an apology. I should have told you everything from the start, but I needed you to see it, I needed you to fight. Humanity had forgotten what it meant to be human, you needed to remember." "You used us," Morrow said, his voice flat. "You let us walk into a trap." "I let you walk into your destiny," Cole corrected gently. "You didn't. T-Run, you didn't hide. You stood and fought alongside a ship that should have been a museum piece. The Terminus died for you today, Admiral, again, and your fleet proved that humanity is ready." "Ready for what?" Morrow demanded. Cole smiled, the smile of a father looking at his child, proud and sad and hopeful all at once. "Ready to join the war," Cole said. "The harvesters aren't gone, they'll be back. There are billions of them spread across 1,000 galaxies. The architects have been fighting them alone for millions of years, but they're tired. They need allies, they need warriors, they need humans. He paused, and his image seemed to dim slightly, as if the light that sustained him was flickering. Earth has been hidden long enough, Cole said. It's time for humanity to step out of the shadows. It's time for you to take your place in the universe. Not as a protected species, not as a client state, but as equals, as partners, as the warriors you were always meant to be. Morrow looked at the screen, at the face of a man who had died 20,000 years ago and come back as a god. He thought about the Terminus, ramming the lead harvester, choosing to die rather than retreat. He thought about the fleet taking hits, losing ships, and keep fighting. He thought about Earth, hidden away like a secret, waiting for its children to grow up. What about the Terminus? Morrow asked. Can it be rebuilt? Cole's smile widened. The Terminus is never truly gone, Admiral. It's a ship. Ships can be rebuilt, but the spirit of the Terminus asterisk, the spirit that drove my father to sit in the dark for 15,000 years, the spirit that drove it to ram a moon-sized machine, that spirit is in every human being. You can't rebuild that, it was always there. Morrow stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked out at the viewport, at the colossal architect standing guard over a hidden planet, at the debris field that had been an alien armada, at the stars stretching out beyond the Oort cloud into the infinite dark. He thought about a dead man in a chair, a button, a warning that took 20,000 years to arrive, and a planet that had been moved, hidden, and protected by people he had never known existed. He thought about what it meant to be human, not the biology, not the genetics, but the thing underneath, the stubbornness, the defiance, the refusal to accept that the odds were too long, that the enemy was too strong, that the fight was already lost. The thing that made a man sit alone in the dark for 15,000 years, watching everyone he loved die just so he could press a button one last time. That was the Terminus asterisk, not the ship, the spirit. This is Admiral Morrow to all ships, he said, opening a fleet-wide channel. Set course for Earth, we're going home. He paused, looking at the empty space where the Terminus had been. And someone find me a shipyard, he added quietly. We have a flagship to rebuild. The fleet turned, its surviving ships forming up in a ragged, battle-scarred formation, and headed toward the hidden planet. Behind them, the dust cloud closed in, wrapping Earth in its protective shroud. The white sphere resumed its silent vigil, folding back into its perfect, watchful shape above the North Pole. And in the light of the crystalline giant, a consciousness that had once been a man named Marcus Cole watched his children come home, and smiled. They had remembered. In the weeks that followed, the truth spread across human space like a slow, seismic shock. The unified Earth government released Admiral Cole's recording to every colony, every outpost, every station in the network. The reaction was not what Morrow had expected. There was no panic, there was no rioting. There was a long, heavy silence, followed by a quiet, collective anger that Morrow had never seen before in his species. People were angry that they had been kept in the dark, angry that they had been treated like children, angry that a war had been fought in their name for 20,000 years without their knowledge or consent. But beneath the anger there was something else, something deeper. Pride, a fierce, burning pride in the man who had sat alone in the dark and in the descendants who had fought in the shadows. The modern fleet, the one that had fought at the Oort cloud, became a symbol. The survivors were decorated, their ships repaired and returned to service. But the real change was in the shipyards. Across human space, construction began on a new class of vessel, not the sleek, elegant cruisers of the modern era. They were blocky, ugly, heavily armored things, bristling with kinetic turrets and oversized reactors. They were modeled after the asterisk Terminus. Morrow watched the first one being assembled from the observation deck of the Sol relay station. It was a monster, 5 kilometers long, its hull a patchwork of overlapping armor plates. It looked like it looked like humanity's. They named it the Terminus II. Serena Cole came aboard the station to formally hand over command of the Terran Shield Directive to the unified Earth government. She was older than she appeared, Morrow knew. Her body was engineered to last, but her eyes held the weight of 20 millennia. She stood next to him at the observation window, watching the new ship take shape. "My father would have hated it," she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Really?" Morrow asked. "It's named after his ship." "He would have hated it because it's unnecessary," Serena said. "He didn't want to be a symbol, he just wanted to go home. He wanted to sit on a beach somewhere and watch the sunset. He never got to do that." "Neither did a lot of people," Morrow said quietly. "No," Serena agreed. "They didn't, but you're going to make sure that the ones who come after us do, aren't you?" Morrow didn't answer, he just watched the ship. The Terminus II launched 6 months later at the head of a fleet of 50 new warships. They were crewed by the standards of the architect technology, but they were human. They were built by human hands, crewed by human men and women, and they carried human weapons. Kinetic turrets that threw slugs the size of ground cars, fusion missiles that could crack moons, and at the heart of each ship in a small, secure vault was a button. A simple, red button, modeled after the one Marcus Cole had pressed 20,000 years ago. A reminder, a promise. The fleet jumped into slip space, heading for the edge of the galaxy where the architects maintained a forward operating base. They were going to join the war, not as refugees, not as clients, but as allies, as equals, as the warriors they had always been meant to be. Morrow stood on the bridge of the Terminus II, his hands resting on the command chair. The chair was made from the salvaged metal of the original Terminus, the only piece of the old ship that had survived the battle at the Oort cloud. A chunk of armor plating, no bigger than a dinner plate, recovered from the debris field and forged into the seat of power of the new flagship. It was cold under his hands, but it felt right. "Helm," Morrow said, "take us out." The stars stretched, blurred, and vanished. The Terminus II slipped into the quantum void, leaving Sol behind. Behind it, Earth orbited its sun in the Oort cloud, hidden, safe, waiting. Around it, the crystalline structures of the architects pulsed with gentle light, keeping their silent vigil. And in the network of the architect's consciousness, a man who had once been an admiral watched the fleet depart, and felt something he hadn't felt in 20,000 years. A hope. The war was far from over. The harvesters, numbered in the billions, spread across 1,000 galaxies. The architects were tired, their numbers dwindling after millions of years of endless conflict. They needed humans, not for their technology, which was primitive by architect standards, not for their numbers, which were insignificant on a galactic scale. They needed humans for the same reason that Marcus Cole had sat in the dark for 15,000 years. Because humans don't quit. It was a trait that no other species in the galaxy quite understood. The Vreshter quit when the math said the odds were bad. The Sylph quit when the aesthetics of the situation became unpleasant. The Drogo quit when the profit margin turned negative. But humans fought when the math said they should run. They fought when the situation was ugly. They fought when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose. They fought because fighting was what they did. Because somewhere deep in the primitive, emotional, irrational core of their being, they believed that the act of fighting was itself a form of hope. That as long as someone was still swinging, the fight wasn't over. The harvesters had never encountered a species like that. They had consumed thousands of worlds, and not one of them had ever made the machines doubt. Not one of them had ever made the machines pause and recalculate. Humans made them recalculate. The first battle beyond the galaxy was a revelation. The Terminus II and its fleet were deployed to defend an architect mining station in the intergalactic void. The harvesters attacked with a force of 500 vessels. The human fleet had 50. The architects had offered to provide support. Morrow had declined. "Send your observers," he had told the architect commander. "But this is our fight. We need to know what we can do." The battle lasted 4 hours. The human fleet lost 31 ships, but they destroyed 412 harvester vessels. The remaining 88 fled. The architect observer, a being of light and crystal who had witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations, filed a report that would be studied for millions of years. In it desk ribbed the human fleet's tactics as fundamentally irrational, tactically absurd, and strategically indefensible. It described their ships as primitive constructs of metal and fire. It described their weapons as crude and inefficient. And then, in a paragraph that would be quoted by every architect commander for the rest of time, it wrote, "The humans do not fight to win. They fight to make the enemy remember that they are being fought. And in this, they succeed with a terrifying consistency that this observer has never witnessed in any species, across any galaxy, in the entire history of this universe." Morrow didn't read the report. He was too busy counting his dead. 31 ships, 15,000 crew members, gone, but the mining station was intact. The architects had their resources. The war continued. He sat in his chair, his hands on the cold metal of the original terminus, and stared at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the galaxy, in the vast, empty darkness between galaxies, the harvesters were regrouping. They were building more ships, harvesting more resources, consuming more worlds. And somewhere in that same darkness, the fleet of humanity was hunting them. It was a war that would last for generations. Morrow knew that he would not live to see it end. His children would not live to see it end, but his grandchildren might, and their grandchildren, and theirs. That was how humans fought. Not for themselves, but for the ones who came after. For the children who would grow up in a universe where the harvesters were a memory, not a threat. For the children who would sit on beaches and watch sunsets without fear of the dark. Marcus Cole had sat in the dark for 15,000 years for them. The Terminus II could sail the void for 20,000 more. And if the harvesters ever came back to Sol, if they ever found the hidden Earth, if they ever thought that humanity was weak or scared or ready to fall, they would find a fleet waiting for them. Blocky, ugly, heavily armored ships, bristling with kinetic turrets and oversized reactors. Ships modeled after a ghost that had come home. And at the head of the fleet, in a chair made from the metal of a dead ship, a man or a woman would sit and press a button. Not to speak, not to warn, but to fight. Because that is what humans do. They fight, they endure, they remember. And in the endless, uncaring, unforgiving darkness of the universe, that is enough. It has always been enough. It always will be.